June 27, 1982. The Beka Valley. Syrian Air Force MiG-21 and MiG-23 fighters scrambled to intercept Israeli aircraft striking Syrian positions. The Syrian pilots were well-trained, flying Soviet-designed aircraft, backed by one of the most sophisticated air defense networks outside the Warsaw Pact. They were confident. Then the F-15 Eagles arrived. Israeli Air Force F-15s, operating with American-made radars and missiles, detected the Syrian fighters from over 50 kilometers away. The Syrian pilots, relying on older radar systems with limited range, had no idea they were being tracked. They flew straight into an ambush. The first Syrian MiG exploded before its pilot even knew an enemy was near. An AM-7 Sparrow missile, guided by the F-15's sophisticated radar, struck with precision. Then another, and another. Within minutes, over a dozen Syrian aircraft were falling from the sky in flames. The Syrian pilots who survived reported something terrifying. They never saw their attackers. They were being shot down by an enemy they couldn't detect, couldn't target, couldn't fight. It was a massacre disguised as air combat. By the end of the day, Israeli F-15s had destroyed 40 Syrian aircraft without losing a single eagle. 0 losses. 40 kills. But rewind a decade. 1972, Moscow, Soviet Air Force Intelligence Headquarters. GRU analysts gathered around a table covered with photographs and technical specifications of a new American fighter, the F-15 Eagle. The Americans had made no secret of it. They were building the largest, heaviest, most expensive fighter in the world. A twin-engine monster designed purely for air superiority. The Soviet analysts studied the specifications and shook their heads. One officer laughed openly. "Look at this thing. It's enormous. 20 tons, empty weight? That's heavier than some bombers. How is this supposed to dogfight? It will fly like a brick." Another analyst agreed. "The Americans have built a showpiece, not a fighter. Our MiG-23 can outmaneuver this. Our MiG-25 can outrun it. This F-15 is typical American excess. Too big, too heavy, too expensive." A third officer added his assessment. "They claim it can climb vertically, that it has a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1. Even if that's true, which I doubt, such a large aircraft cannot be agile. In a real dogfight, our pilots will tear it apart." Soviet military journals published similar assessments. The F-15 was mocked as an over-engineered waste of money. Western defense critics agreed. The fighter was too expensive, too complex, trying to do too much. They were all catastrophically wrong. The F-15 Eagle didn't just succeed. It dominated air combat so completely that it has never lost a single air-to-air engagement. Not one. In over 40 years of combat operations, across multiple wars, against dozens of different adversaries, the F-15's record stands perfect. Over 100 victories, 0 defeats. This is the story of the fighter the Soviets laughed at. The jet they said would never work. The aircraft that proved them wrong and buried their doctrine beneath 40 years of unbroken dominance. To understand why the F-15 represented such a revolutionary design, you need to understand the crisis that created it: Vietnam. Throughout the 1960s, American air power in Southeast Asia faced an unexpected problem. The United States had technological superiority, better aircraft, more resources. But American fighters were losing to North Vietnamese MiG-17s and MiG-21s, smaller, simpler, supposedly inferior aircraft. The problem wasn't the planes themselves. The F-4 Phantom II, America's primary fighter, was a capable aircraft, but it had been designed as a multi-role platform: fighter, bomber, reconnaissance. It carried no internal gun, relying entirely on missiles. Its design priorities emphasized versatility over specialization. In Vietnam, those compromises proved deadly. F-4s loaded with bombs for ground attack couldn't effectively dogfight. Early air-to-air missiles were unreliable. The AM-7 Sparrow had a success rate below 30%. North Vietnamese MiG-17s and MiG-21s were simpler, more maneuverable, optimized for close-range combat. They carried guns. American pilots found themselves in knife fights with enemy fighters while flying aircraft designed for beyond visual range missile combat. The kill ratio was embarrassing. In World War II and Korea, American fighters achieved kill ratios of 10 to 1 or better. In Vietnam, the ratio dropped to 2 to 1, sometimes worse. The Air Force analyzed these losses and reached a painful conclusion. They'd forgotten the lessons of air combat. They'd assumed missiles would replace dogfighting. They'd built aircraft that tried to do everything and excelled at nothing. They'd compromised air superiority for versatility. Never again. In 1968, the Air Force initiated the FX program, fighter experimental, with a single-minded goal: build the world's best air superiority fighter. Not a multi-role aircraft. Not a compromise. A pure air-to-air fighter designed to achieve and maintain control of the skies against any opponent. The requirements were ambitious. Defeat any Soviet fighter in any type of engagement at any altitude. High-speed interception. Low-speed dogfighting. Beyond visual range missile combat. Close-in gunfighting. Everything. The fighter needed speed exceeding Mach 2.5, acceleration superior to any Soviet aircraft, maneuverability to win turning fights, powerful radar to detect and track multiple targets simultaneously, and weapons to kill at ranges from 50 miles down to gun range. Multiple contractors competed. McDonnell Douglas won with a design that seemed absurd. The largest, heaviest fighter the U.S. had ever built, powered by two massive Pratt and Whitney F-100 turbofan engines producing over 25,000 pounds of thrust each. Empty weight, 28,000 pounds. Maximum takeoff weight, 68,000 pounds. Wingspan, 42 feet. Length, 63 feet. It was enormous compared to fighters like the MiG-21, which weighed half as much. Critics immediately questioned the design. How could something that large be agile? Wouldn't it be an easy target? Wouldn't it cost too much? But the design incorporated revolutionary concepts from fighter theorist Colonel John Boyd's energy maneuverability theory. Boyd had mathematically analyzed air combat and concluded that what mattered wasn't size or even pure speed. It was the ability to change speed and direction rapidly, to out-accelerate and out-turn opponents. The F-15's twin engines provided a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1 to 1 at combat weight. This meant the aircraft could accelerate while climbing vertically. It could sustain turning fights at high speeds without bleeding energy. It could accelerate out of danger or pursue fleeing enemies. The large wing area provided enormous lift, enabling tight turns at high speeds. The combination of power and wing area meant the F-15 could maneuver like a much smaller aircraft despite its size. The radar, the Hughes & APG-63, was a pulse Doppler system capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously while guiding missiles. It could detect fighter-sized targets at ranges exceeding 50 miles and continue tracking during aggressive maneuvering. This was revolutionary. Most contemporary radars lost lock during turns. The F-15 carried an internal M61 Vulcan cannon and could launch AM-7 Sparrow and AM-9 Sidewinder missiles. Later variants would carry the AM-120 AMRAAM, providing fire-and-forget capability at long range. The first F-15A flew on July 27, 1972. Test pilots immediately recognized they were flying something special. The Eagle was fast, agile, powerful. It could do things no other fighter could do. But Western defense analysts remained skeptical. The F-15 was expensive. Unit cost exceeded $10 million, making it the most expensive fighter ever built. Critics questioned whether such cost could be justified. Wouldn't simpler, cheaper fighters make more sense? The Air Force was betting everything on quality over quantity. They believed one F-15 could defeat multiple enemy fighters, that technological superiority would overcome numerical disadvantages. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was watching and developing their response, and they were convinced the Americans had made a terrible mistake. The F-15 Eagle's development represented the most ambitious fighter program the United States had attempted since World War II. Every system pushed boundaries. Every design choice prioritized air superiority over everything else. The engines were the heart of the revolution. Pratt & Whitney's F-100 turbofan was designed specifically for the F-15, producing unprecedented thrust with acceptable fuel consumption. Each engine delivered over 25,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner. more powerful than entire fighter aircraft from previous generations. This raw power transformed what fighters could do. Previous aircraft had to choose between speed and maneuverability. You could accelerate or you could turn, but doing both simultaneously bled energy rapidly. The F-15 had enough power to do both. It could enter a hard turn, maintain speed, even accelerate while turning. This energy advantage made traditional dogfighting tactics obsolete. The engines were also redundant. Lose one engine, and the F-15 could still fly and fight effectively. This redundancy proved critical. Several F-15s have returned to base after catastrophic damage to one engine, including one Israeli F-15 that landed safely with one wing nearly torn off. The twin-engine configuration provided survivability unmatched by single-engine fighters. The airframe was equally innovative. McDonnell Douglas engineers used advanced aluminum alloys and new manufacturing techniques to create a structure that was both strong and light. The large wing area, combined with leading-edge maneuvering flaps, provided excellent lift characteristics across the entire flight envelope. The Eagle could maneuver at 30 degrees angle of attack, far beyond what conventional fighters could sustain. This meant the pilot could point the nose at targets even during extreme maneuvers, maintaining weapons employment capability throughout engagements. The cockpit was designed around the pilot with unprecedented attention to human factors. The bubble canopy provided 360-degree visibility with no significant blind spots. The head-up display projected critical flight and weapons data onto a glass screen in the pilot's line of sight, eliminating the need to look down at instruments during combat. The throttle and stick incorporated hands-on throttle and stick (HOTAS) controls, allowing pilots to manage weapons, radar, and countermeasures without removing hands from primary controls. This might seem minor, but in combat where seconds matter, reducing pilot workload and response time was revolutionary. The radar system was perhaps the most significant advance. The N/APG-63 could track multiple targets simultaneously, something most contemporary radars couldn't do. It could look down and detect targets against ground clutter, crucial for intercepting low-flying aircraft. And it could maintain lock through aggressive maneuvering, allowing the pilot to guide missiles while dodging enemy fire. The radar's range was classified, but significantly exceeded Soviet capabilities. F-15 pilots could detect, identify, and engage enemy aircraft before those aircraft even knew they were being tracked. This first look, first shot, first kill capability became the Eagle's defining advantage. Weapons integration was sophisticated. The F-15 could carry 8 air-to-air missiles for AAM, 7 Sparrows on fuselage corners, and 4 AM, 9 Sidewinders on wing pylons. Later variants added conformal fuel tanks that carried additional weapons without degrading aerodynamics. The internal M61 Vulcan cannon carried 940 rounds of 20mm ammunition for close-range combat. The avionics suite included radar warning receivers, electronic countermeasures, and identification friend-or-foe systems. The F-15 could detect when it was being tracked by enemy radar and take evasive or offensive action. It could jam enemy radars. It could identify whether radar contacts were friendly or hostile at ranges where visual identification was impossible. Training new F-15 pilots required extensive time and resources. The aircraft was complex, demanding, unforgiving of mistakes. But pilots who mastered it gained capabilities no other fighter pilots possessed. They could engage multiple enemies simultaneously. They could fight at ranges from 50 miles to knife fight distances. They could dominate any engagement. Early operational experience revealed some problems. The F-100 engines had reliability issues, particularly with stalls and stagnation at high angles of attack. The radar, while revolutionary, was maintenance-intensive. The aircraft was expensive to operate. Flight hour costs exceeded any previous fighter. But these were manageable problems, addressed through modifications and improved maintenance procedures. The fundamental design was sound. The F-15 worked. McDonnell Douglas received orders for over 1,000 aircraft for the Air Force. Production began at St. Louis, Missouri. The first operational squadron, the first tactical fighter wing at Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, received F-15s in January 1976. Soviet intelligence monitored this production with interest and growing concern. They'd initially dismissed the F-15 as impractical, but American enthusiasm suggested they might be wrong. GRU analysts began reassessing their conclusions. Soviet test pilots who'd flown American aircraft through various means reported that Western fighters were generally well-designed, capable machines. The F-15 specifications, if accurate, suggested it would be formidable. But Soviet doctrine emphasized that superior pilots and tactics could overcome technological advantages. The Soviet Air Force was developing responses. The MiG-29 Fulcrum was designed as a lightweight, highly maneuverable fighter optimized for dogfighting. The Su-27 Flanker was a heavy fighter comparable to the F-15 in size, but optimized for different capabilities. Both aircraft were years from operational deployment, but Soviet designers believed they would match or exceed the Eagle's capabilities. More immediately, Soviet tactics emphasized using ground-controlled intercept radar to vector fighters onto targets, compensating for inferior aircraft radar. Soviet missiles, particularly the R-73 AA-11 Archer, were highly capable within their operational range. Soviet pilots trained extensively in close combat maneuvering, believing skill would overcome technology. This confidence would soon be tested. Israel, America's closest Middle Eastern ally, was ordering F-15s, and Israel's Air Force had a reputation for aggressive, innovative tactics. When Israeli F-15s entered combat, the world would finally see what the Eagle could do. The results would shock everyone, including the Americans who'd built it. Moscow's Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute, 1976. Soviet aerospace engineers gathered to analyze the F-15 Eagle, now entering American service. Their assessment would shape Soviet fighter development for the next decade. The analysis began with what Soviet intelligence had gathered: specifications, photographs, performance estimates. The F-15 was indeed massive, nearly twice the empty weight of the MiG-21, the Soviet Union's most numerous fighter. It carried sophisticated radar and electronics that Soviet designers acknowledged were advanced. But Soviet analysts identified what they considered critical weaknesses. A classified Soviet Air Force assessment from 1977, declassified decades later, stated, "The F-15 represents American doctrine prioritizing technology over tactical flexibility. Its large size makes it visible to radar and vulnerable to infrared missiles. Its sophisticated systems will be difficult to maintain in field conditions. Its high cost limits procurement numbers, ensuring Soviet numerical superiority." This assessment reflected genuine Soviet doctrinal beliefs. Soviet fighter design emphasized different priorities than American design. Where Americans built large, capable aircraft in smaller numbers, Soviets built simpler, cheaper aircraft in vast quantities. The MiG-29 Fulcrum, entering development as the F-15 became operational, embodied Soviet philosophy. Smaller than the Eagle, optimized for close combat, equipped with the R-73 infrared missile with exceptional maneuverability and helmet-mounted sight. Soviet doctrine expected MiG-29s to close quickly, get inside the F-15's missile engagement range, and win through superior dogfighting. The Su-27 Flanker represented a different approach, a heavy fighter comparable to the F-15 in size and capability. Soviet designers studied the Eagle carefully and incorporated similar concepts: high thrust-to-weight ratio, large wing area, sophisticated flight control systems. But the Su-27 wouldn't enter service until the mid-1980s, giving the F-15 a decade of operational advantage. Soviet propaganda emphasized the superiority of Soviet fighters. Aviation and Cosmonautics magazine, the Soviet Air Force's official publication, ran articles claiming Soviet aircraft were lighter, more maneuverable, more reliable than Western counterparts. The F-15 was portrayed as a typical example of American waste: expensive, overcomplicated, designed more for impressing politicians than fighting wars. But behind closed doors, some Soviet engineers expressed concern. The F-15's radar capabilities exceeded anything Soviet fighters carried. If American missiles worked as advertised, the Eagle could engage Soviet fighters before those fighters could respond effectively. This beyond visual range advantage was worrying. Soviet radar design had followed different paths than American development. Soviet radars generally had shorter range, but were optimized for close combat. Soviet doctrine emphasized ground-controlled intercept, using ground-based radar to vector fighters onto targets rather than relying on aircraft radar. This worked well defensively, but was less effective for offensive operations. The R-23 AA-7 Apex and R-24 AA-7 Apex missiles were Soviet attempts at beyond visual range weapons, but they had significant limitations. They required continuous radar illumination from the launching aircraft until impact, meaning Soviet fighters had to fly straight toward targets while guiding missiles, extremely vulnerable to counterfire. The Americans' AM-7 Sparrow had similar limitations, but American radar could maintain lock through aggressive maneuvering, and American tactics emphasized supporting fighters to cover the shooter. Soviet tactics were less sophisticated in this regard. Soviet pilot training emphasized different skills than American training. Soviet pilots trained extensively in aerobatic maneuvers and close-range combat. They practiced rigid tactical formations designed to maximize ground controller effectiveness. American pilots trained more independently with greater tactical flexibility. Which approach would prove superior remained theoretical. The Cold War hadn't produced direct American-Soviet air combat. War games and simulations could only predict so much. Real combat would be the ultimate test. That test came in the Middle East. Israel had been flying American aircraft since the 1960s, achieving remarkable success against Soviet-equipped Arab air forces. Israeli tactics were aggressive, innovative, and brutally effective. When Israel ordered F-15s in 1976, both American and Soviet intelligence watched closely. Israeli F-15s entered service with No. 133 Squadron in December 1976. Israeli pilots, already experienced with F-4 Phantoms, quickly mastered the Eagle. They immediately recognized they were flying something revolutionary. Israeli F-15 pilot Moshe Melnick later described his first experience. The F-4 was a good aircraft, but it was a compromise. The F-15 was pure fighter. Everything about it was designed to win air combat. The power, the radar, the weapons integration, it felt like cheating. Soviet advisors in Syria, Egypt, and other Arab countries reported on Israeli F-15 acquisition with concern. They reassured their Arab allies that Soviet aircraft and tactics could counter the new American fighter. MiG-23s were being delivered to Syria and other countries. These aircraft, Soviet advisors claimed, could match the F-15. The Syrian Air Force was one of the largest and most capable Arab air forces. It operated modern MiG-21 and MiG-23 fighters, trained by Soviet instructors, supported by sophisticated Soviet-supplied air defense systems. Syrian pilots were professional, experienced, confident. They were about to receive a painful education. The 1982 Lebanon War would provide the first major combat test of the F-15 Eagle. Israeli and Syrian air forces would clash in the skies over the Bekaa Valley in one of the largest air battles since World War II. Soviet tactics, Soviet aircraft, and Soviet doctrine would face the American fighter they dismissed as too heavy, too expensive, too complicated. The results would shock the Soviet military establishment and force a fundamental reassessment of their fighter development program. The mockery would die in the wreckage of dozens of Soviet-designed aircraft falling from Lebanese skies. June 9, 1982. The Beka Valley, Lebanon. Operation Peace for Galilee. Israeli defense forces were engaged in a major offensive into Lebanon, aimed at destroying PLO strongholds. The Syrian Arab Republic, allied with the PLO and concerned about Israeli intentions, deployed substantial military forces, including air defense systems and fighter aircraft. The Syrian air defense network in the Bekaa Valley was formidable, a miniature version of Soviet strategic air defense. SA-2, SA-3, SA-6, SA-8, and SA-9 surface-to-air missiles provided overlapping coverage. Radar stations coordinated tracks and directed interceptors. It was the most sophisticated air defense network outside the Warsaw Pact. Israeli military planning identified the air defense network as the critical target. Destroy it, an Israeli aircraft could operate freely. Leave it intact, and every mission would risk heavy casualties. On June 9th, Israeli forces launched a coordinated operation to destroy the Syrian air defenses. Unmanned aerial vehicles drew SAM fire, revealing radar locations. Electronic warfare aircraft jammed Syrian communications. Then came the strike aircraft, supported by F-15's Flying Combat Air Patrol. Syrian Arab Air Force headquarters detected the Israeli attack and scrambled fighters, MiG-21s, MiG-23s, and a few MiG-25s. Over 60 Syrian aircraft launched to engage the Israelis. Ground controllers vectored them toward Israeli formations. Israeli F-15 pilots detected the Syrian fighters on radar at ranges exceeding 50 kilometers. The Syrians, flying aircraft with radar ranges of 20 to 30 kilometers, had no idea they were being tracked. The first engagement occurred at approximately 11:15 a.m. Israeli F-15s fired AM-7 Sparrow missiles at Syrian MiG-21s from beyond visual range. The Syrian pilots, receiving no warning, saw their comrades' aircraft suddenly explode in mid-flight. Some thought they'd been hit by surface-to-air missiles. They couldn't believe they were being engaged by enemy fighters they couldn't even see. Syrian MiG-23 pilots attempted to close range, hoping to use their R-23 missiles or get into dogfighting range where they believed their maneuverability advantage would prevail. They never got close. Israeli F-15s would detect approaching Syrians, fire missiles, then either disengage to allow the missiles to track or close for additional shots. The Syrian fighters were fighting blind. Their radars couldn't maintain lock, their ground controllers were being jammed, their infrared missiles couldn't acquire targets at the ranges F-15s were engaging from. When Syrian aircraft did get close enough for visual combat, the results were even more one-sided. F-15s could outturn MiG-21s despite being twice as heavy. The Eagle's thrust-to-weight advantage meant it could sustain turning fights without bleeding energy. Syrian pilots would attempt aggressive maneuvers and find the F-15 still on their tail, lining up for gun or short-range missile shots. One Israeli F-15 pilot, Amir Nachumi, described an engagement with MiG-23s. They tried to dogfight. They were aggressive, well-trained. But it didn't matter. I could stay with them through any maneuver. When they tried to run, I just accelerated and stayed on them. It was almost unfair. By the end of June 9th, Israeli F-15s had shot down 23 Syrian aircraft without losing a single Eagle. The Syrian Air Force had lost over a third of the fighters they'd committed to the battle. Syrian pilots who survived reported catastrophic losses and confusion about what they'd faced. The air battle continued for weeks. Every day, Syrian fighters scrambled to intercept Israeli aircraft. Every day, they were shot down in numbers that shocked even Israeli pilots accustomed to aerial victory. By the time combat operations concluded in late June, Israeli F-15s had destroyed 41 Syrian aircraft confirmed, with several more probable. The kill ratio was essentially infinite, 41-0. Not a single F-15 had been shot down or even significantly damaged by Syrian air defenses or fighters. Soviet advisors in Syria were stunned. They'd witnessed MiG-21s and MiG-23s, aircraft they'd trained Syrian pilots to fly, using Soviet tactics, being systematically destroyed. The reports initially seemed like exaggeration or propaganda. But Soviet intelligence confirmed the basic facts. The F-15 was achieving kill ratios unprecedented in modern air combat. A classified Soviet Air Force analysis from late 1982, recently declassified, admitted, the F-15's performance in Lebanon exceeded our projections. Its radar and missile systems provide engagement capabilities at ranges where our current generation fighters cannot effectively respond. The aircraft's maneuverability, despite its size, is adequate for close combat. We must reassess our previous assessments of Western fighter capabilities. This honest internal analysis contrasted sharply with public Soviet statements, which continued emphasizing Soviet fighter superiority. But the lesson was clear. Soviet doctrine, tactics, and equipment were inadequate against the F-15. The Lebanon engagements also revealed specific weaknesses in Soviet systems. The R-23 and R-24 missiles, which required continuous radar illumination, were practically useless in combat, where maintaining lock meant flying straight at an enemy shooting back. Soviet radars couldn't maintain track during aggressive maneuvering. Soviet infrared missiles had excellent capability within range, but couldn't match the reach of American radar-guided missiles. Israeli success wasn't just the aircraft. It was the combination of aircraft, training, tactics, and electronic warfare. But the F-15 was the foundation. It provided capabilities that enabled those tactics. Without the Eagle's radar range, beyond visual range kills would have been impossible. Without its maneuverability, dogfighting victories would have been difficult. Without its power, sustaining combat operations would have been exhausting. Soviet fighter development was redirected in response. The MiG-29 and Su-27 programs accelerated. Both aircraft were redesigned to incorporate lessons from Lebanon. Better radar, improved missiles, greater thrust-to-weight ratios. The R-73 infrared missile with helmet-mounted sight received priority. Soviet designers believed close-range combat remained their best chance against American fighters. But these aircraft wouldn't enter service until the mid-1980s. In the meantime, Soviet-equipped air forces faced an unpleasant reality. They were technologically outmatched. The F-15's combat debut had exceeded even American expectations. U.S. Air Force analysts studied Israeli tactics and results extensively. The Eagle had proven its design philosophy correct. Air superiority achieved through technological superiority, not numbers. One well-equipped, well-trained pilot in an F-15 could defeat multiple adversaries. American pilots training against simulated Soviet tactics gained confidence. If Israelis could achieve such dominance, American pilots with similar or better training could expect similar results. The next test would come in Iraq. But before that, throughout the 1980s, F-15s continued racking up kills. More engagements with Syrian aircraft over Lebanon. Saudi F-15s shooting down Iranian fighters during the Iran-Iraq War. Every engagement confirmed the pattern. F-15s killed enemy aircraft, F-15s didn't get shot down. By 1990, the F-15 had approximately 60 confirmed air-to-air kills with 0 losses. The aircraft had been operational for 14 years. It had faced Soviet-designed fighters of multiple types. It had operated in different conditions, against different tactics, and it had never lost. That record was about to be tested in the largest air war since Vietnam, Operation Desert Storm. January 17, 1991, 2:38 a.m. Baghdad time. Operation Desert Storm's air campaign began. U.S. Air Force F-15C Eagles from the 1st, 33rd, and 36th Tactical Fighter Wings flew combat air patrol missions over Iraq, providing air superiority for strike packages attacking Iraqi targets. Their mission: ensure Iraqi fighters couldn't interfere with coalition bombing operations. The Iraqi Air Force was substantial. Over 700 combat aircraft, including Soviet-supplied MiG-21s, MiG-23s, MiG-25s, MiG-29s, and French Mirage F-1s. Iraqi pilots had combat experience from the 8-year Iran-Iraq War. They were professional, motivated, defending their homeland. But they faced an overwhelming disadvantage. American technology, training, and tactics had evolved far beyond what Iraqi forces could counter. The first air-to-air kill of Desert Storm occurred on January 17th, executed by Captain Steve Tate in an F-15C. His radar detected an Iraqi MiG-29, the Soviet Union's newest operational fighter, at long range. Tate fired an AIM-7 Sparrow missile. The MiG-29 exploded. The Iraqi pilot never knew he was being engaged until his aircraft disintegrated around him. This pattern repeated throughout the first days of the war. F-15CS would detect Iraqi fighters taking off from bases, track them using airborne radar, engage with beyond visual range missiles, and destroy them before Iraqi pilots could even locate their attackers. Captain Rick Tolini described one engagement. We detected 2 MiG-29s on radar. They were climbing out of an air base, probably looking for us. We fired from about 15 miles. Both missiles guided perfectly. Both MiGs went down. I never saw them visually. The radar and missiles did all the work. Iraqi pilots attempted various tactics to counter the Americans. Some tried low-altitude flying to avoid radar detection. F-15 radars, optimized for look-down capability, tracked them easily. Others attempted high-speed dashes hoping to avoid missiles. The AM-7 and later AM-120 AMRAAM missiles were faster and more maneuverable. Some Iraqi pilots tried to engage in close combat, where they believed their maneuverability might provide advantage. The few who got that close discovered the F-15 could match or beat their turning performance, while simultaneously defending against their missiles with chaff and maneuvering. One of Desert Storm's most dramatic engagements occurred on January 19th. Captain Cesar Rico Rodriguez detected a formation of 4 Iraqi fighters, 2 MiG-29s and 2 Mirage F-1s. In a single engagement lasting about 2 minutes, Rodriguez shot down all 4 aircraft using a combination of AM-7 and AM-9 missiles. 4 kills in one engagement, a feat matched by only a handful of pilots in aviation history. Rodriguez later described it. They were trying to engage our strike package. I had good radar contact, good geometry. I shot the first MiG-29 with a Sparrow, turned hard, shot the second MiG-29, then went after the Mirages with Sidewinders. It happened so fast I didn't have time to think. Training just took over. Iraqi fighters sometimes fled when they detected F-15s. Ground controllers would vector Iraqi aircraft toward targets. The pilots would detect American radar emissions or see F-15s visually, and they'd immediately disengage and run for the deck. Many Iraqi aircraft landed with full weapons loads, their pilots unwilling to engage an enemy they considered unbeatable. By late January, Iraqi fighters had largely stopped flying. It wasn't a formal order. Iraqi Air Force leadership continued issuing sortie instructions, but pilots were refusing missions. Some claimed mechanical problems. Others simply didn't report for duty. The psychological impact of seeing dozens of comrades shot down while achieving no kills against F-15s was devastating. Several hundred Iraqi aircraft fled to Iran rather than face coalition air forces. The Iranian government, still hostile to Iraq from their recent war, impounded the aircraft and never returned them. Iraqi pilots apparently considered internment preferable to combat against F-15s. The F-15's weapons systems proved as effective as designed. The AM-7M Sparrow, often criticized in Vietnam for reliability problems, achieved success rates exceeding 70% in Desert Storm. The AM-9M Sidewinder was nearly perfect in close-range engagements. The combination provided overlapping capability from beyond visual range down to close combat. The APG-70 radar, an improved version of the original APG-63, performed flawlessly in combat conditions. It tracked multiple targets simultaneously, maintained lock through aggressive maneuvering, and provided targeting data accurate enough for beyond visual range kills. Iraqi electronic warfare attempts to jam the radar were ineffective. The radar's frequency hopping and signal processing defeated Iraqi jammers. F-15C pilots flew continuous combat air patrol missions, sometimes 8 to 10 hours with aerial refueling. The aircraft's reliability was extraordinary. Mission-capable rates exceeded 90% despite intense combat operations. Maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep Eagles flying, and the aircraft responded by performing without significant failures. By the end of Desert Storm on February 28, F-15CS had achieved 36 confirmed air-to-air kills. Total F-15 losses to all causes, 0. Not one shot down by Iraqi fighters or surface-to-air missiles. The only F-15 loss during the war was an F-15E Strike Eagle destroyed by a surface-to-air missile during a low-altitude ground attack mission, a completely different mission profile than the air superiority F-15CS flew. The kill ratio was absolute, 36-0. The F-15 had faced Soviet-designed fighters of multiple types, flown by combat-experienced pilots, supported by integrated air defenses, and achieved perfect victory. Soviet military observers who'd predicted the F-15 would struggle against modern Soviet fighters had to confront uncomfortable reality. The MiG-29, specifically designed to counter the Eagle, had been shot down repeatedly without achieving a single kill. Iraqi 29 pilots reported that they were being engaged and destroyed before their own radars even detected the F-15s. A Russian military analysis published in 1992, after the Soviet Union's collapse, admitted the Gulf War demonstrated that Western, particularly American, fighter aircraft possess overwhelming advantages in beyond visual range combat. Our aircraft's close combat advantages are irrelevant if they cannot survive to close range. The F-15 has proven itself the dominant air superiority fighter of its generation. This honest assessment marked a dramatic shift from the mockery of the 1970s. Soviet confidence in their fighter designs, tactics, and doctrine had been shattered by observing American air dominance over Iraq. The United States Air Force drew its own lessons. The F-15's performance validated the air superiority fighter concept. Quality over quantity worked. Technological superiority, combined with superior training and tactics, could achieve overwhelming victory against numerically superior adversaries. Desert Storm also validated specific capabilities the F-15 provided. Beyond visual range combat was now proven as the primary air combat regime. Radar performance and missile effectiveness determined outcomes more than aerobatic capability. Situational awareness, knowing where enemy aircraft were before they knew about you, was decisive. These lessons influenced future fighter development. The F-22 Raptor, entering development as Desert Storm concluded, would emphasize stealth, sensor capability, and beyond visual range combat even more than the F-15. The F-35 Lightning II would incorporate similar priorities. But the F-15 itself wasn't retiring. Its performance in Desert Storm ensured continued production and upgrades. The aircraft had proven it could dominate any air combat environment. Why replace something that worked perfectly? The F-15 Eagle entered operational service in 1976. In 2024, nearly 50 years later, it remains in frontline service with multiple air forces worldwide. This longevity is extraordinary and speaks to how revolutionary the original design was. The combat record stands unmatched in modern aviation history. Over 100 confirmed air-to-air kills across multiple conflicts: Lebanon, the Persian Gulf, Iraq, and other engagements. 0 losses to enemy aircraft. No other fighter in the jet age can claim such dominance. This record includes victories against a wide variety of opponents: MiG-21s, MiG-23s, MiG-25s, MiG-29s, Su-22s, Mirage F-1s, and various other aircraft. The F-15 has faced first-generation jet fighters and fourth-generation Soviet designs. It has defeated every opponent it's encountered. The reasons for this success are multifaceted. The original design's emphasis on radar capability, weapons systems, and situational awareness proved prescient. These capabilities mattered more in combat than pure aerodynamic performance. The F-15 could detect, identify, and engage enemies before they could respond effectively. But the Eagle's dominance also reflects continuous modernization. The F-15 flying today is dramatically different from the F-15 of 1976. Avionics have been upgraded repeatedly. Radar systems have evolved through multiple generations. Weapons integration has improved continuously. The F-15C divided by D variants, optimized for air superiority, received major upgrades in the 1980s and 1990s. The APG-70 radar replaced the original APG-63, providing improved range and tracking capability. Digital flight controls improved handling. Structural modifications extended airframe life. The F-15E Strike Eagle, introduced in 1989, adapted the basic design for dual-role operations, air superiority, and precision ground attack. With conformal fuel tanks, advanced targeting pods, and the ability to carry 24,000 pounds of ordnance, the Strike Eagle proved that the F-15 airframe was adaptable to missions beyond pure air-to-air combat. International sales validated the design's excellence. Israel, Saudi Arabia, Japan, and South Korea all operate F-15s. Each country has integrated the aircraft into their air forces successfully, often adding nation-specific modifications. Israeli F-15s, for instance, carry indigenous electronic warfare systems and weapons. The Israeli Air Force's experience is particularly instructive. Over 4 decades of operations, Israeli F-15s have never lost an air-to-air engagement. They've shot down dozens of Syrian, Iraqi, and other Arab aircraft. In one remarkable incident in 1983, an Israeli F-15 survived a mid-air collision that tore off most of one wing, yet still flew home and landed safely, a testament to the aircraft's structural integrity and engine power. Saudi F-15s have also seen combat, shooting down Iranian fighters during border skirmishes in the 1980s and 1990s. Every international operator reports similar experiences. The F-15 dominates air combat when properly employed. Technology continued advancing. The F-15 incorporated improved missiles as they became available. The AM-120 AMRAAM, a fire-and-forget missile with active radar homing, gave F-15s the ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The AN-9X Sidewinder with high off-bore sight capability improved close combat effectiveness. Helmet-mounted displays, originally a Soviet innovation, were integrated into later F-15s. This allows pilots to target simply by looking at enemies. Wherever the pilot looks, weapons can be aimed. But challenges emerged. Newer adversary aircraft, the Russian Su-35, Chinese J-20, and others, incorporated stealth features, advanced sensors, and capabilities that narrowed the F-15's advantages. The Eagle's large radar cross-section made it visible to modern radars at long range. Its radar, while upgraded, couldn't match the performance of active electronically scanned array (AESA) systems in newer fighters. The U.S. Air Force responded with the F-15EX Eagle II, the latest evolution entering service in the 2020s. This variant features an AESA radar, advanced electronic warfare systems, fly-by-wire flight controls, and the ability to carry hypersonic weapons. It's essentially a new aircraft using the proven F-15 airframe. The F-15EX decision was controversial. Why not buy more F-35s or F-22s? The Air Force's reasoning was practical. The F-15 airframe remains highly capable. It's less expensive than stealth fighters, and it can carry enormous weapons loads. For missions where stealth isn't critical, the F-15EX provides capabilities at reasonable cost. This demonstrates perhaps the F-15's most remarkable quality, adaptability. The basic design, conceived in the late 1960s, has been continuously evolved to remain competitive against threats that didn't exist when it was designed. How many technologies remain relevant for 50 years? Some F-15s built in the 1970s are still flying operational missions today. With proper maintenance and upgrades, airframes designed for 4,000 flight hours have been extended to 8,000 or more. Some F-15s may fly for 70 years total service life, unprecedented for fighter aircraft. The Soviet Union, which mocked the F-15's complexity and cost, dissolved in 1991. The fighters it developed to counter the Eagle, the MiG-29 and Su-27, have seen limited export success and have never achieved combat records comparable to the F-15. Russia's current fighter, the Su-57, incorporates stealth and advanced avionics intended to match or exceed F-15 capabilities. But production numbers are tiny, fewer than 20 operational aircraft, and the Su-57 has seen minimal combat service. The aircraft the Soviets said would defeat the Eagle has never actually faced it. China's J-20 represents another approach, a stealth fighter designed for beyond visual range combat. It's an impressive design, but it's also untested in combat. The J-20 pilots have studied F-15 tactics extensively because they know that's the standard they must meet. The F-15 Eagle outlived the country that mocked it, outlasted the fighters designed to defeat it, and continues flying today while its competitors are museum pieces or struggling programs. From the skepticism of 1972 to the dominance of 2024, one truth remains constant. The Eagle has never lost. They gathered in Moscow in 1972, Soviet generals and aerospace engineers, reviewing specifications of America's new fighter. They saw the weight, the size, the complexity, and they laughed. Too heavy for dogfighting, they said. Too expensive for quantity production. Typical American over-engineering. They believed their MiG-23s and coming MiG-29s, lighter and simpler, would tear apart this American showpiece. They believed Soviet doctrine, emphasizing numbers and agility, would overwhelm Western technological excess. They were wrong. Lebanon, 1982. Israeli F-15s destroyed 40 Syrian aircraft in 3 weeks. 0 losses. Desert Storm, 1991. American F-15s shot down 36 Iraqi fighters, including the vaunted MiG-29 designed specifically to counter the Eagle. 0 losses. Over and over, in conflict after conflict, the pattern repeated. F-15s detected enemies first, engaged from beyond visual range, dominated any combat regime from long-range missile shots to close-in dogfighting. And F-15s never fell. The kill ratio isn't just impressive. It's absolute. Over 100 victories. 0 losses to enemy aircraft. No other fighter in history can claim such a record. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, 15 years after the F-15 entered service. The empire that mocked the Eagle didn't survive to see its own fighters match it. Russian engineers today study the F-15's design principles as a template for what works in air combat. The fighters designed to defeat the Eagle, MiG-29, Su-27, and their descendants, have seen service with air forces worldwide. Some have achieved combat victories. None have matched the F-15's dominance. None have achieved anywhere near its perfect record. Nearly 50 years after its first flight, the F-15 remains in production. The F-15EX Eagle II, incorporating 21st century technology into the proven airframe, is entering service with the U.S. Air Force. Countries worldwide continue flying and upgrading their F-15 fleets. Some of these aircraft may serve until the 2040s, 70 years from initial design. This longevity speaks to how revolutionary the original concept was. The designers got the fundamentals right: power, radar, weapons, situational awareness. Everything else could be upgraded as technology advanced, but those fundamentals remained sound. They said it was too heavy, but that weight carried fuel, weapons, and systems that made it unbeatable. They said it was too expensive, but not one American pilot has been lost in air combat, flying an F-15. What price would you place on that? They said it was too complex, but complexity brought capabilities that simple aircraft couldn't match. The Soviet generals who laughed in 1972 aren't here to see the result, but their successors know. The Eagle they mocked ruled the skies for 40 years. It still rules them today, and nothing they've built has ever brought it down. Over 100 kills. 0 losses. The numbers don't lie. The F-15 Eagle. The fighter they said couldn't win. The jet that never lost.